You have plenty of good content and you would really love for that content to make you some money. Of the many important questions you have to answer at this point, probably the most important one is where should you put all this content? As many platforms as possible, or lean into an exclusive deal with a single platform? I'm Seth, one of the streaming experts here at ViewNexa. Let's examine the pros and cons together. The pros and cons of platform exclusivity. Some of the most ambitious and high-budget content can only be produced with outside funding provided up front. Historically, the most common way to secure that funding has been to enter an exclusivity agreement with the hosting platform. These agreements typically require the host to pay for the content in exchange for an exclusive license to host that content on their platform. This allows you, the creator, to focus on making content instead of chasing revenue, while the host has the opportunity to make a return on their investment by attracting advertisers and/or subscribers. The more engagement your exclusive content can turn into money for the host, the more willing that host is to keep paying you for more content. So if all goes well, everybody wins. But the exclusivity approach comes with some downsides too. For one thing, it limits your potential reach, exposure, and market success to that of the hosting platform. Now, in theory, there's nothing wrong with that, but in practice, it can lead to significant risks on all sides. A struggling platform can bring some great content down with it. Likewise, an expensive and exclusive piece of content must perform not just extremely well, but well enough to help the hosting platform compete for attention in a market that is A, extremely competitive, B, deeply fractured, and C, consolidating significantly. These unstable conditions just raise the stakes even higher. In short, the exclusivity approach is a high-risk, high-reward strategy. When it works very well. But when it fails, that can make content or even entire platforms just disappear. The pros and cons of multi-platform distribution, or what you might call next-gen syndication. See, in the broadcast era, non-exclusive content was described as being syndicated, meaning it was licensed to multiple hosting parties simultaneously. In the streaming era, that's been referred to as multi-platform distribution, but the term next-gen syndication is starting to catch on. The primary advantage of this approach over the exclusivity approach is that this way, the success of your content isn't tied to that of any one specific platform, and that means your content has a much more resilient market presence. On the other hand, arguably the most significant downside of this approach is also the point at which the analogy to old broadcast syndication kind of starts breaking down. Because the way that a production studio would make money off of syndicated content back in the broadcast era was by selling rights licenses to multiple hosts. And the idea was that the revenue would come from the selling of those licenses. Now, those hosting networks and channels would still be making money off of ad revenue using a business model called FAST, free ad-supported television. But those hosts would keep most of that ad revenue for themselves. But in the streaming era, syndication works very differently now. Rather than the hosting platform paying for a license to stream the syndicated content, it is the content creators and production studios paying the host for the privilege of having their content be available on that platform. So the non-exclusive creators now handle both their production costs and their distribution costs out of pocket. What they get in exchange for that is a cut of the ad revenue. In short, even non-exclusive content still has to generate a lot of engagement in order to be profitable. But the stakes of the non-exclusive approach are very different from the stakes of the exclusive approach, and those differences matter a lot to people whose job it is to make content. So now let's compare fixed distribution costs to more flexible models like revenue sharing. Part of what makes non-exclusive content more expensive to launch up front is the need to cover the cost of distributing that content to the various hosting platforms. Most productions don't own their own pipelines for distributing content, so they have to hire a third-party distributor to handle that part of the process for them. Many of those distributors offer something called revenue sharing as a way of offsetting some of those initial startup costs, making the launch process both faster and cheaper. But while the rev share model is effective at reducing startup costs. It also lowers the metaphorical ceiling by distributing that revenue across a greater number of parties. By contrast, distributors who bill a flat rate raise both the floor and the ceiling. It's more expensive to launch, but the potential profit is also much higher without having to share any of that revenue with the distributor. The questions of which platforms to target and what distribution methods to use are arguably the most important questions a content creator or production studio will ever consider. So if you're struggling to navigate all those implications, you do not have to do it alone. You don't even have to pay someone to get basic guidance tailored to your specific situation. If you'd like some free help, you can have me or any of the other experts at ViewNexa audit your content library and offer some insights into what kinds of platforms make sense for content like yours, what their models are, and what options you have, all at no cost. Next time, we'll talk about social media and how the lines between that world and the world of streaming television are starting to blur or even disappear. So stay tuned, and I'll see you next time.